Thank you very much. My name is Jennifer Holcomb, and I am the security solution lead for a company called Marcon Solutions. We're about 270 employees outside of the DC proper area and located here in Northern Virginia. And Marcon is a client services company, primarily doing consulting, project management, construction management for a number of our clients. The services that we offer focus more on facilities. That's about 60% of our work, really. But my focus is actually on the security side. And so that's one of the services that we offer, whether it's specifically for security assessments or if we're looking at security support as it relates to a number of our government clientele as well. And we integrate that with some of our existing contracts doing other services with the construction management. We also have acquisitions, finance, technology is one of our newer solutions. And then the last one, of course, is our training. So we have a lot of interesting and varied opportunities to support clients depending on what it is that they need. Now, for me, I'm actually a civil engineer by education and have taken that on to continue into homeland security design, which I've been doing for over 15 years, which has led me into the security side with assessments and other things. And then, of course, I've been doing a lot of the construction management and project management for clients on various things, whether it's been environmental, whether it's been security. It's just been a number of different things, but it's been a great opportunity to build up the security side and integrate everything all into one.
Okay.
Into one focus.
And Jennifer, as we get into this question, I want to take a question from the audience that's relevant to this topic. So I think the topic of this conversation will be a visualization around the design and construction management phases and how digital twins can help and what the value will be. And I think what I've seen anyways is a lot of silos of data. You know, certain people have LiDAR, BIM, and these different groups don't always get a good method to share this data. So I think that's an interesting part. But taking a quick step back to the security question, what is basically the question is around NIST frameworks and ISO standards that exist in providing best practices and controls when we're looking at aggregate uniform data. You know, what do we look for here? Is this kind of a FedRAMP thing, or what are your thoughts on this with the NIST framework and ISO standards for data security?
Well, it can definitely get complicated, and right now I would say that it's getting more complicated with the integration of the CMMC, looking at the various classifications, if you will, of data or open source data, which is the FOUO, the law enforcement sensitive things that used to be a number of things are all going to be put in under this controlled, unclassified information banner or headline. And when you start integrating the CMMC and you start looking at the end use of the data, what it is that you're dealing with, and especially the clientele, that's really going to determine what those specific requirements are going to be. Now, when you start dealing a lot of times with government clients that may be more on the IC side, the intelligence community, they do tend to be more concerned about the information and especially the aggregation of data as it comes in and then is utilized. So there we do start looking at some of the FedRAMP capabilities and FedRAMP compliance issues to make sure that the data is actually being protected, and whether it's on a system that is FedRAMP compliant, or again, whether we're looking at putting it on the system for the closed network of the client itself. It's something that they will dictate. When we start looking at some of the other entities, some of the commercial entities, we would look more into some of the ISO standards. NIST does tend to be a government requirement, so that is going to be something that we'd be dealing with just those government clients. But ISO would be something that would be looking at the way that they handle data and what the recommendations are associated with that. Excuse me. Again, just to ensure that the data itself is actually secure. So there are some different aspects associated with it. And I see you just gave another post with respect to the specific ISO documents related to the information, and those would be the ones that we'd be looking at as we're dealing with some of the data. But again, it's all going to come down to ultimately the client's requirements for how we are handling things. And we do see that it varies around the horn, depending on what they know, who they are, whether they're going to be a big target or whether they're a small target with respect to the security. Smaller companies tend to not be as focused on securing the data necessarily. If it's something that can be behind a password or a firewall, that's usually sufficient. But as we get up into that government end, it is going to be much more stringent and required to make sure that the data is protected as it should be per those government requirements, the NIST standards especially.
Excellent. I appreciate the detailed answer there. And kind of pivoting from that, when you're looking at approaching project management and oversight from a visualization perspective, how does that change the game? Does it change the game? Who can be involved with the process without being on site? What does that mean to you? And then I'd like to get some feedback from the rest of the panel, and we'll start with Sam after this, and go into Scott and Kelly Stewart. But what are your thoughts on that?
The visualization during project is actually a great thing to help. Now, whether it's a renovation or whether it's new construction, it's going to be usable both ways, but somewhat differently. So when we're dealing with a renovation, one of the things that you would want to consider is what does the existing structure look like and what's going on there. Now, with visualization, one of the things that you can do is you can start to utilize the AutoCAD drawings and turn those into the 3D components that you can put over the actual. And the actual would be something then that we're capturing somehow, whether it is by the 360 of the cameras, whether it's looking at it from the LiDAR perspective, trying to look at as-built, which I always kind of question as-built just based on whether or not they've actually been maintained, redlined, and are accurate. So that's where the data capture is helpful to make sure that at least you have a realistic and current up-to-date system that you're looking at and comparing against what's going to be constructed and installed. So from there, you can first look at that and use the visualization just to make sure everything fits, to make sure that there's nothing that's really standing out that could be a conflict or an issue, and address it now when it's going to be a lot easier to address than later or during the middle of construction when all of a sudden you have all sorts of change orders. For new construction, it's still a great opportunity because with the visualization, you can do the 3D walkthroughs. You can check to make sure that everything looks right. One of the things that you can find is that everything looks good or can look good on paper, but you may not be able to turn that wrench on that nut that you happen to put on the inside and realize that it doesn't fit unless you actually kind of start walking through and seeing things. And sometimes those little details that can be huge. And it's just a matter of seeing it rather than just looking at it in a two-dimensional form on paper.
Yeah, it's really a seeing and believing here, isn't it? And I think that's extremely true when we look at two-dimensional and three-dimensional, right? And how does egress and environment and furniture and equipment and all those things change the way we look at the design or how we move through a project, right?
Exactly.
Great.
I mean, you certainly don't want to have to cross through a lobby that has a door on one side, a door on the other side, and you're trying to cross furniture and existing systems. It just gives you that chance to make sure that everything makes sense and flows well in the actual execution.
Well, it gives you this opportunity to validate the information based on a frozen point in time where everything is collected and you know, a photo and a point cloud, these things are not going to lie because they record data agnostically, whereas a human that walks through the facility has a sense of cognitive bias, we used to say in the crime scene space, because your brain processes things differently based on your experiences. So you're going to see certain things and miss other things. But when we have a digital twin, we can all collaborate looking at the same thing. And I think that's really powerful. And I think especially when we get into language barriers, if we have projects that are, you know, we're looking at defining things differently. You might call an asset one thing. I might understand that something different. So when we look at the same page, it's almost like a universal language of seeing things that I think is really powerful. But appreciate your feedback there. Sam, any feedback from your side? And then we'll pivot to Scott and then Kelly Stewart. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, just a couple things. So in terms of visualization, you know, it's a clear and concise document of a snapshot of time, as you alluded to. You know, my father used to say to me when I was younger that the shortest pencil will outlast the longest memory, and I really think that kind of applies in this you know, the A&E world, inspection, survey, you know, whatever it may be, design. I think that documentation is important. The visualization side of it and the ability to bring it all together into a quasi-immersive environment, I think is really important as well. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of owners, they don't care how we got there. Right. And you look at it from a BIM perspective, and you can show them a model in Navisworks and, or some other visualization type program that for modeling. And, you get a lot of oohs and ahs and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, the ability to take visualization, put it into a platform that just about anybody can use from an owner's perspective is incredibly important. It allows them to feel like they're a part of the decision-making process, which, we laugh about that. Sometimes you want them in there, sometimes you don't, but ultimately they always want to be there. So I think that the owner experience is enhanced by this. And though it may not be the technical argument that we're all looking for and we always want to make, it's a darn important one.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so important because, sharing some of these other types of complex data is a little more tricky. And for those that aren't working with LiDAR and haven't experienced that yet, those that do understand the fundamental challenges would be able to share and accurately get people to dive in and absorb that data. So great feedback. Thank you, Sam. Scott, any feedback from your side on project management, project oversight, and your experiences?
Yeah. So for us, we're really not as much involved on that part because we're the data providers that the folks that do a lot of that are involved with. But the one thing I would say to the digital twins is that is something that we are involved on the things that have already been built. And the reason for that is that, which was kind of gone over by some of the previous folks too, is that it's a record of what you have. And one of the biggest problems that we found in oil and gas that was actually kind of staggering for me when I first got involved is the lack of historical data, the lack of, we'll go in and we'll do an inspection and then we'll say, hey, could you guys show us the data from last time? We'll be happy to do, a comparative analysis for you. And, 90% of the time it's, well, we don't have any. And so we'll say, well, what happened last time? Well, we were good. We passed. And that's one of the things now that I think with digital transformation kind of sweeping through corporate America, and also some of the things that we've seen with, the Sempra gas issues out in California with transmission line fires that, there's going to be more and more compliance issues where people they're going to want to see the data. They're going to want to see that when you had your right of way flown, instead of just saying, you were clean, there weren't any methane leaks. What does your right of way look like though? Where are your pipelines? When we go in, like, when I did that tank recently, that Kelly and I worked on, they had no data on that tank in the past. And now for, anytime in the future when they need to go back in there, there's going to be a 360 walkthrough in there. There's going to be, laser scan data of that. We modeled the entire outside of that tank using photogrammetry and the drone. So and that's really important because you can't get a comparative analysis without a data set. And so that's what a lot of this technology is really going to do. And that's why it's groundbreaking, because now these guys will have archives of these things that have been built, assets that are outside. And that's really their main concern. Year on year, what does it look like now versus what it looked like last time? But then as those data sets get better, then, machine learning can kick in and start to maybe model corrosion. It can model deflection of steel plates. It can model a lot of things that will allow these guys to plan their budgets better because they're going to be able to be ahead of the maintenance costs and the maintenance issues rather than being reactive to them.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, that's open-ended. I mean, who knows where that can go. So the digital twins are going to be huge for that because you're going to have somebody that has a facility that will have their handle on the ability to look at anything last year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, down the road. And that way they know exactly where they stand versus today. There's just so little of that historical data available.
Yeah, we're talking 40 minutes in a tank and an hour processing, and you're diving into a project and assigning tasks to people and planning out the repair. And I
Right.
think that's pretty down to that same day, and you're actually setting up the plan for the next day. Now, getting in the tank, as you had your last project, showing up at 8:30 on an oil and gas site, not getting into tank till 4:30, that's an industry problem, right? And I think a lot
Well,
of
if you could solve that one, Kelly, I think you'd make more money than you're making with this. But.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I mean, at least the touch points reduce, and they reduce significantly. And through those conversations, I think that was really evident. Is yes, you're the one on site that has to collect that data, but now who doesn't have to go to the site? And I think from a planning perspective and a quoting perspective and a project management perspective, it's extremely valuable to reduce that, especially during COVID.
Well, that's what we found is, because we do a lot of 3D fly-throughs and walkthroughs of construction sites. We do a lot of what we call construction progressionals, where we'll fly every week or every 2 weeks and render the entire site in 3D. But then that's shared with people globally. I mean, you can be a Japanese investment group in Tokyo overseeing a rail yard being built in Pasadena, Texas, and those guys can have same-day visualizations or fly-throughs of the entire site. And, just from a compliance point of view, I mean, historically it's the old, call Bob, hey, how are things going down there? Everything going great? Oh yeah, man, we're on time. We're killing it. When in reality, the only thing he's killing is the company. But, you have no idea, you can't, how do you know, unless somebody's going to drive 3 hours from Dallas or fly in from somewhere. So I think it's going to be really valuable. And I think that even you're starting to see the banks getting involved because so much of their lending is in tranches based on completion percentage, they're going to start using these kind of tools to really quantify, at what stage is a product or a project, but really with a granular view, because here it is right in front of them, instead of taking somebody's word for it.
100%. And with the insurance industries as well, I remember sitting in AIG's corporate office in Manhattan like 5 years ago, talking about monitoring progress with LiDAR and with imagery. And there's a big challenge, right? There's big risks here. And we're relying on people's, two-dimensional information, job site photography. It's just not enough. It's not a complete picture. And I think just tying off on the rest of this conversation, I think one point was really evident with the clients that Scott and I were talking to was, the one thing that was really an aha for them was that they just never got that completed picture of the things that were done post-repair, the welds, the seals. Were they done right? Yes, we have the report that we're done, but having the digital twin showing and proving that everything was done before we start filling these things up with fuel again, and they sit there for another 5, 10, or 20 years. So from a liability perspective, absolutely valuable to be able to preserve and to validate and to understand things were done, and they were done to code, or really save people's butt in the long term too.